It is your Friday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Glad to be back for another day. Hope you guys are having a good one out there as well. Really good show coming up. Marcus Fuller from the Star Tribune will talk some Gophers men's basketball here in a few minutes. Gophers play Northwestern Saturday at Williams Arena. A tough stretch of games for them, an important stretch of games coming up. Northwestern's a good team this year. They're very good. They could be an NCAA tournament team this year. Gophers trying to get to where they are. They're 4-5 in the Big Ten right now. Started out 3-1, had that slide. A good comeback win at Penn State the other day. And you can say that about every win they've had this year in the Big Ten. They have not had a halftime lead in all 9 of their Big Ten games, yet they have won 4 of them. Be nice for them to get a lead at halftime at some point here. Maybe they can do that on Saturday. Marcus and I will talk a little bit more about their season so far and get into some more college basketball stuff as a whole, including some St. Thomas men's basketball as well. Got some listener questions at the end of the show and an acknowledgement. Yesterday marked 3 years of daily delivery. Time flies. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Today is episode 769. Can you believe that? I can't believe that. Thanks to everyone who has listened to all 769. I don't know if anybody has except for me, but I appreciate all of you very much, and thanks for listening to everything that you have listened to. And I'll get to some listener questions at the end of the show. The Jim Harbaugh thing at the end of the show as well. First, though, what did I miss? Let's talk about Karl-Anthony Towns for a little bit. Named an All-Star on Thursday. A little bit of surprise to me, given that I thought maybe Rudy Gobert would be the Wolves' second All-Star this season if they got one. Anthony Edwards the first, and that one was a little bit more, not a guarantee, but you knew that if the team leading the West was going to get at least one. You thought maybe they'd get 2. I thought it might be Rudy Gobert. Karl-Anthony Towns, though, absolutely deserving of it. It's been very efficient this season. Slow start to the year, but since then, he's been lights out. He's carried them offensively in a lot of games. Had that 62-point game earlier this year, although they lost. He's just been a very efficient, complimentary at some times, but dominant player at others, part of this year's team. But I wanted to bring this up in the context of what Cat has done is just very impressive. Think about this. Here's a guy who had to do the most adapting to the Rudy Gobert trade, right? Rudy Gobert comes over like 18 months ago, plays Cat's position. Cat's got to move to the 4, essentially, for a lot of his minutes, the minutes at least that Gobert isn't on the floor. He's got to learn a new position quickly. Talked about that a lot. He talked about that a lot last year, just the adjustment period, having to, fill a different role defensively, having to fit in a different way offensively. All he's heard about in the last 2 or 3 years is how this is becoming Anthony Edwards' team, how everything they're doing is building around Anthony Edwards, even though Cat is now a 4-time All-Star, had made 3 All-Star games before that, was certainly worthy of being thought of as at least one of the franchise pillars. And I think they still think of him that way, but a lot of the rhetoric, a lot of the talk, even from Tim Connolly, the president, was that, hey, everything we do from this point forward has to be maximizing Anthony Edwards and his timeline, his skills, his gift. Edwards also certainly worthy of that, but it kind of felt like Towns was being pushed a little bit, not out, but pushed a little bit further to the perimeter when it became when it came to kind of the team's priority. So here's a guy who lost his position, lost his stature a little bit, gets hurt last season, has misses about 2/3 of the season, has to sit out. He's got that calf strain. Everybody's saying, why aren't you coming back sooner? What's going on? What's the problem here? He's got this reputation over the years as being not soft, but as being complaining about the refs. People are mad at him about that. I've tried to trade him like 8 different times. I'm not the GM, I'm not the president, but I've tried to trade him like 8 different times, saying, hey, the Wolves need to move on. This is the odd man out. This is the guy that doesn't really fit. You look at all the contracts they've got on the books. You look at next season when the NBA salary structure changes. Now is the time to trade Cat. I was on that all off season before the trade deadline last year, thinking this could be an issue before the trade deadline this year, which is only a handful of days away now. So we've tried to trade him a whole bunch of times thinking, hey, this isn't the guy that fits. The start of this season, at media day, it was an awkward energy, I felt like, when Cat was there. He just didn't seem like he was into it. He was all business, very serious, short answers. You're like, what's up with Cat? What's going on here? Is he not happy here? Through all of that, comes back this year and is an all-star, is voted in by coaches as a reserve along with Edwards Thursday night. That's just impressive to me. I gotta stop and just give him the recognition he deserves for the season he is having so far this year. He's been really good in a lot of these games, good enough, like I said, to be an all-star, to be worthy of selection, to be now in his fourth all-star game. That's an impressive resume. It reminds you of just how good Karl-Anthony Towns can be when he is at his best. I still wonder, long-term, where this is all going. The salaries there's something's got to be done about salaries, or they've got to decide they're going to pay all these guys for the foreseeable future. But right now, right in this moment, he has reestablished himself as a key player, as a star player on a very good team. I didn't know if he'd ever get back to this point, especially when he was hurt last season, especially when the fit seemed weird last year. We're not talking about how he and Rudy Gobert fit together anymore. We're talking about what pieces could the Wolves add around this to be a deep playoff team and maybe even an NBA title contender this season. Part of that certainly is because of Karl-Anthony Towns. There's a lot of components to this team, but he is certainly one of the most important ones this season. He has been tremendous, deserving of being an all-star, especially after all that has happened in the last 18 months.
Grand Casino would like to take a moment and salute the true football fan. The passion, the hope, the anticipation, that incomparable feeling of winning. Grand Casino would also like to take a moment to remind you that you can find all that anticipation, thrill, and winning at Grand Casino. Grand Casino, let your story begin.
I want to talk Gophers men's basketball today, and I know just the guy to do it. Marcus Fuller from the Star Tribune joins me here now. Marcus, how you doing?
Pretty good. Yeah, we're enjoying some pretty good weather now, and interesting. It kind of feels like it's spring, after the NCAA tournament, but we're not even in March yet, so this is interesting.
Barely into February. We're recording right now, and it's February 1st. It does feel like spring right now. We know it'll come around a little bit, but once you get to February, you are talking about, hey, we kind of know a little bit more about these teams. They're trying to make a move, trying to make a push in this month so that they're in a good spot once March comes. I don't think the Gophers right now are dealing too much in, scoreboard watching or too much net rating kind of looks, but they're just trying to get better every day, winning some games. 4-5 in the Big Ten right now, Marcus. And you told me before we started recording, they've trailed at halftime of every single Big Ten game, but won 4 of them, including pretty big comeback against Penn State, their last game out. Imagine if they ever had a halftime lead. What would they do?
Well, Ben Johnson would say, and a number of coaches have said this, even though it's weird because when I was playing, I never heard it, but it's one of the most overrated stats in basketball or sports is the halftime score. Of course,
okay.
You could say that if you're Detroit Lions, in the
right
championship game. But I think that what it says is that obviously the Gophers are a second half team, but also really it's about how they started the game, what type of lineups they've had starting the game, how well do those lineups, match up with what they're trying to do philosophy wise. And, it takes them a half to make adjustments to that. I think a lot of teams kind of know their identity going in and they stick with that. I think the Gophers have kind of adapted to the teams in the Big Ten, whoever they've played. They want to play fast, but you can't necessarily do that in the Big Ten. That leads to a lot of turnovers and, quick shots. And, they find themselves in the second half, maybe playing a little bit of slow paced basketball, playing some zone defenses, trying to work it inside to their post players. And then it's helped them win some games, but I think that for the most part, when you have that stat, You don't expect to win 4 out of 9 games. And I think they've done that with, more depth this season, more talent, guys stepping up like the last game. And I think Ben Johnson's hanging his hat on that right now, that he's got some more depth than he's ever had.
Can they take what they've been doing in the second half and incorporate it into the first half, or is it like what you said, it takes them a little while to adjust and figure out, okay, this is the kind of game we're playing. Now we can get to it.
I think that's the idea, right? I mean, they would have done it if they could do that. It just hasn't happened. And I just think, because they've had some different lineups, they've had guys out, they haven't really figured out how to play together until later in the game, and also really, for some reason there's this light that just pops on, and they get really motivated when they're down. I think that they've been pretty close a couple times, taking a halftime lead, and it just didn't work out. But they've been really blown out in some games early, and they've turned it around. And that's the surprising part. It's not just that they're down at halftime. It'd be one thing if, hey, you're down 9 games at halftime by, 3 points or four
Right.
points or, single digits, but they've been down several times, double digits and high, like 16 points, 20 points, 14, at Penn State. So this is a pretty significant turnaround for them in some games, to not only win, but to get back into it. And like you said, if you're able to start a little better, especially on the road, if you're playing like a Michigan State, or you're playing, they don't play Wisconsin on the road this year, but some of those games that if you win these are resume building wins. You don't want to be trailing at halftime on the road. That's for sure.
No, but they were able to come away with a win, like you said, at Penn State, which was an important one. It stopped their slide that they had been on, stopped kind of they hadn't been playing all that poorly in some of those games. Almost beat Wisconsin, had a chance there. They were in other games, but needed to get a win and some not unlikely people emerging, but Parker Fox has a good game in that one, and they're kind of their depth gets tested. Other guys emerge. You talked about the depth. What Parker Fox, what's he bringing to the table? What are some of these other guys who maybe weren't playing super prominent roles? What do they bring into the table right now?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Ben Johnson has a lot more depth this year, and you're seeing it tested. A few games ago at Michigan State, Elijah Hawkins, their starting point guard, was out, and they had to adjust to that, and they nearly pulled that game out. Cam Christie, Mike Mitchell Jr., Braden Carrington, those guys had to step up in Elijah's absence. They hadn't had that guard depth last year. So, it was a similar situation at Penn State last weekend. Pharrell Payne was out. He's been starting some games in the front court. They went with a similar starting lineup that they had in the past with Joshua Joseph and Dawson Garcia. But, that leaves you with a pretty big void in the middle as far as a rim protection. And, in the first half, they were just obliterated in the post. I think Penn State scored about 24 points in the paint, and they were pretty much getting everything they wanted, even with a zone defense, which is kind of shocking. And then in the second half, they kind of made some adjustments, went back to man, and Parker Fox had, I think, 3 of his 4 blocks in the second half. He Dawson played a little bit better defense, and so did old Joseph, and just the entire team, and that helped spark them. Parker's known for being an athlete. I mean, he's always been that his whole life, but 2 knee injuries, and he's still jumping up there and dunking and blocking shots. That's pretty incredible. It's a spark for this team. It definitely gave them momentum. On the offensive end, Dawson Garcia and Cam Christie had a huge second half, and that's what lifted them. But I would say that Parker, you're right. I mean, from game to game, when Pharrell was healthy, you're not sure what you're going to get from him minutes wise. But they needed to play him quite a bit that night, and he delivered.
Where are they health wise now? Where's Payne at? Where are they at with everybody else?
We'll find out here pretty quick before the game, but I think Pharrell definitely benefited from having almost a week off from playing. They played last Saturday, and they'll play this Saturday versus Northwestern. So that was, resting him a game, and give him a week to kind of get his foot back in order. I'm sorry, it was his foot earlier in the year. Now it's his back. He has some back pain that really I think in the offseason he might need some surgery. But right now, um, he just has to kind of get through it. And I mean, this is a guy who, when he's playing, he's one of the best young post players in the Big Ten. And when he's not out there, it doesn't matter who you face, you have to replace that. And he's been battling through it for several games, pretty much all season. And this is the first time that he was out because of his back. So, I think Ben said the last time we talked to him that he was going to give it a go if he could. He's been a questionable in every game in the last couple weeks. So I would expect it to be a game time decision. And, we haven't talked about it yet, but they're in a stretch here where there's really some tough opponents. Not that Penn State on the road was not, but we're talking about the upper echelon of the Big Ten, and so having Pharrell out there is going to be critical.
Yeah, you mentioned I was going to get to that now, so that's a good segue. Northwestern at Williams Arena on Saturday. I believe the next game after that is another home game against Michigan State. Opportunities here, especially at home, but you're right, a challenging slate. The Big Ten kind of dividing itself pretty clearly into, the very elite teams, but then this kind of next level, Northwestern definitely in that group. How much do you think it would mean to them to get a win Saturday, and how do you think they navigate this stretch of better opponents?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about it, or I wrote about it a couple weeks ago that they were going into a stretch of 7 games. 5 of them would be quad one opportunities. The net rating changes every week, and right now, I was going to look it up, but Northwestern is their next opponent, and they're 55 in the net, and so they're just outside of that, quad one victory if the Gophers were to beat them at home. But at the same time, Northwestern is an NCAA tournament team, and they've proven that last year, and they're proving it again this year. And so if you can beat a team that is expected to make the NCAA tournament right now, I think you can hang that on your resume. And, you got to protect the home court. They've lost the last couple games at home, really good opponents, but, when you're playing the upper part of the Big Ten, you expect that the home court advantage will help you pull some of those out. That after that, it doesn't get easier for them. I mean, they play Michigan State at home again, or a rematch of the road game they lost. And Michigan State, I would say, is playing a lot better this year than they were earlier in the season, but still a team that they were capable of beating on the road, and you expect that they would have a better chance at home. So if they can come away with a couple of those wins and get back above 500 in the Big Ten, we're not talking NCAA tournament, but I would say that that's a clear indication that this team is several steps ahead from last year, the last 2 years, and is on their way to, being a solid team in that middle of the pack in the conference.
And that's important every year, but starting next year with the addition of new teams in the conference, going to 18 teams now. Let's talk a little bit about just the change in the Big Ten tournament. You wrote about this. I've seen it. Not everybody's going to get in at a certain point. What do you think about that, and just the changes to the format, and what does Ben Johnson think about that?
Well, that's going to be a little strange for beat writers because, obviously, we love covering the Big Ten, but if your team doesn't make it, you're probably not going. So I think that if the Minnesota obviously were playing next year with the record they had the past 2 years, they would not have made it. And I think Ben Johnson is not the only one, is probably a little frustrated by this decision. There's a lot of teams that you never know. I mean, Ohio State was, at the top of the league a couple of years ago, and now, they're beneath the Gophers in the standings. And last year they were right there in that bottom three. So we're talking about Ohio State, one of the prominent teams, in the Big Ten over the course of the last 10 years being left out. if they were if it was uh, last year. So I think that, he's what he said was correct in that sometimes you don't know what's going to happen at the end of the year with injuries and a little slide. And you don't want to prevent a team from playing the postseason when all they need to, is a game or two to get healthy and they're a totally different squad. He was saying that he would hope that, that they would have a chance to like play themselves into it if they finished in the bottom three, like a somehow a matchup of those
Sure.
teams. Sort of like what they did with the NCAA tournament, those playing
Right.
games. But I don't think that's happening. And I mean, obviously it's not happening at this point. And that's just the decision they've made. I agreed with the uh sticking with the 20 game Big Ten schedule. I think adding some would just make it impossible to schedule really quality non-conference games, especially at home. Too many of those, and that you want to reward your fans for coming to the non-conference games and not having to always play, the Southwest, whatever states of the world.
Hmm.
I mean, it just doesn't, it doesn't make it appealing during late November and, you know, early December to always see those opponents. So, yeah, I just do think that, shortening the Big Ten field and the Big Ten tournament was probably not something that went well with the coaches.
So they're down to so three teams will miss it. So 15 teams will make it. That's a weird number to arrive at, but I guess they've
Right.
got it. I guess they've got it figured out as to how that will work.
Which essentially is more than currently.
Right.
But obviously, if you add four teams and they're not, necessarily bottom level teams,
No,
you're
they're
talking
not.
about potentially, three current, you know, traditional Big Ten teams not making it. Can you imagine, that three of the four new teams, let's say they replace three of the Big Ten teams currently, and so then instead of having I'm just throwing it out there, Ohio State and Rutgers and Penn State,
Yeah.
and then you replace that with UCLA and USC and Oregon, um, that's going to be unusual, and those teams that aren't making it, you don't have a chance to make a run to the conference tournament championship and get into the NCAA tournament. Your season is essentially over after the regular season.
Yeah, it'd be different for sure and something to get used to. I mean, everything's going to be something to get used to next year. I mean, this is going to be just a wild scene, different in some sports than others. But, the teams they're adding in general in a lot of these sports, and especially college basketball, they're pretty good. They're going to be pretty good as the competition is not going to get any easier. They're going to have to be even more ready to go. Marcus, couple final things for you. One, let's shift away from the Gophers. You wrote about St. Thomas men's basketball for Basketball Across Minnesota and a guard who's finding his way. Tell me a little bit more about that story.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning it. Really fun column that I have. Chip Scoggins, our columnist, does a great job with football across Minnesota, and I love basketball, not just at the college level, but all levels. But in this story, Drake Dobbs from St. Thomas, he is a familiar name for a lot of people here, playing for Eden Prairie, one of the best teams maybe ever. His senior year, they were 28-0, and they beat Chad Holmgren and Jalen Suggs Minnehaha Academy team by double figures and beat Dawson Garcia's Prior Lake team, blew them out. I mean, they were beating everybody, but they didn't get to play in the state tournament that year because of COVID. Shut down the state tournament. So, they'll go down in history as undefeated. They're fine with that. But after he left Eden Prairie, he's kind of had a winding path. Went to Liberty, came to St. Thomas, and when he got to St. Thomas, he got there in the middle of the year, had to sit out. And when he was thought he was eligible, he struggled a little bit academically, had never done that before, and that's something that a lot of people, there's a stigma to that, right? Like if
Yeah.
you write, oh, academically ineligible, people automatically think, oh, this guy, he's never been a good student and, what's wrong with him not taking academics as a priority? Well, that hasn't been the case. He admitted that and he wasn't ashamed to talk about it, that he had never had trouble academically until that point, just maybe not taking it as serious as he should have during the summer. And so he had to sit out 22 games first semester. He wasn't really all into it mentally coming back from that, but he turned himself around this year and became a leader. And it was just a story that, like I said, not a lot of kids are willing to fess up about that. And he turned himself into one of the top most improved players in the Summit League. And the Drake Dobbs that we saw at Eden Prairie is starting to show up quite a bit for the Tommies his senior year, and he's helping them contend in the Summit.
Yeah, they're tied for second in the Summit. They have had some nice wins, some competitive games this season. And man, I loved your lead, or just the first handful of paragraphs talking about, man, being on an all-Metro team with 2 future NBA lottery picks is quite an accomplishment.
And he held his own, like it's not like you're like, what is this guy doing on that team?
Right.
If you watched him play those teams, you would know, like, Drake Dobbs was him, as the younger generation likes to call it. But no, I again, those stories don't always get told. When you're talking about academics, there's a negative stigma to that, but I think he turned it definitely into a positive.
I liked at the end of the piece too, you talked about a Division II showdown. Minnesota State, Mankato, and MSU Moorhead played each other. Mankato won 19-1. We don't shine a light on Division II all the time, so I'm glad you were able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I did a BAM on them a couple weeks ago, maybe just last week, and they both shared the #1 ranking at one point this year, and I knew that game was going to be down the road when they play each other. I just thought maybe one of them would be #1 at that time, but they both, it has to happen, right? They both lost the game before that. Still, top 10, top 5 teams in the country. And there's just a lot of good basketball, like you said, not just at the Division I level. Now we have 2 Division I teams in the state, but Division II, Division III, a lot of good teams, a lot of good players.
Go check out Marcus's work, Star Tribune at startribune.com. Not just the Gophers, although that is the main beat he covers. Plenty of other basketball content in there as well. Marcus, appreciate it. Enjoy your work and enjoy the rest of your day. We'll talk to you down the road.
I will. Stay warm out there.
Royal Credit Union's smart checking accounts offer no monthly fees and no minimum balance. Enjoy financial freedom when you open your Royal Credit Union smart checking account online at rcu.org/go-checking. Insured by NCUA.
Really appreciate Marcus jumping on with me. And again, big game for the Gophers on Saturday against Northwestern at home. Chance to get another quality win, chance to get back to 500 in the Big Ten. Feels like the kind of toss-up game you would like to see them win if indeed they are improved this season. Really quick, before we get to the cooler, Jim Harbaugh introduced as head coach of the Chargers, and apparently he has a vision for living in an RV for a little while. Let's let Jim Harbaugh explain from his introductory news conference.
Okay, so I want to drive my RV out. I want to drive my RV out and go to a trailer park, like down by the water or by Disneyland. There'll be 2 that I've researched that are close to the facility, and I want to Jim Rockford it for the for the next couple months until we move to the new facility. I have that thought going through my head.
People have been making fun of him about this a little bit, but I kind of like this. I think this is, why not live that life for a little while? Decompress a little bit. Maybe that's a nice way to have some familiarity. He's in his early 60s now. It's kind of like dabbling in retirement without really being retired. I'm sure he's going to be working massive days, things like that. But why not ease into things? Just go take your RV down to California, chill out by the beach or something like that, hang out for a while. Why not? Go crazy, Jim Harbaugh. Why not? And, always important to remember, too, with him joining the Chargers, that was a possibility for the Vikings a couple of years ago. Maybe he would have been driving an RV near you somewhere here in the Twin Cities, but instead he is in LA, and we'll see how that all works out for everybody. Let us finish with the cooler now. A couple of listener questions. Like I said at the beginning of the show, kind of had this idea in honor of 3 years of daily delivery. Like I said, episode 769. That is a lot of daily deliveries. Thank you all for listening to this. And yeah, here is a couple of listener questions that I liked from the past couple weeks. One of them from a Detroit Lions fan, not so much a serious one. We'll get to that one in a minute. The other one's a little bit more serious. Listener Mark says, not seeking an exhaustive study, but wondering over a recent time span, say 3 to 5 years, the degree to which a season series between two conference foes in the NBA accurately reflects a later playoff matchup, not merely wins and losses, but maybe in other angles. Interesting question. I'm sure he's looking ahead to the potential for the Wolves, things like that, what teams they might match up with, better or worse. I didn't do an exhaustive study. I looked at some Wolves stuff from recent years to see if I could glean anything. Here's something from last year, right? The Wolves went into the Denver series kind of confident because they had split the season series 2-2, right? And they were getting some guys back. They were healthy. They thought they matched up pretty well with the Nuggets, who eventually were the NBA champs. The Wolves lost that series 4-1, but it was fairly competitive. Maybe not as competitive as they might have tried to make it seem in retrospect. But again, the Wolves were missing a lot of key players in that series too, especially Jaden McDaniels in that series. That was a big one for them that they were missing in that series. So in the regular season, they split 2-2, but the Wolves won a blowout over Denver when Nikola Jokic didn't play. 2 nights later, he plays. He's a plus 40. They rout the Wolves. The other 2 games were maybe more of a true even split and gave the Wolves some confidence. But I think so much of this is determined by who plays during the regular season, who's resting, who's injured. That, to me, is the bigger storyline than how each team fared. I went back just for sake of comparison. The last time the Wolves were truly great, 2003-04. Yes, that was 20 years ago. They beat Sacramento 3 out of 4 times in the season series, then went on to win that NBA Western Conference semifinal series 4-3. I think some of it is stylistic. Some of it, you look at teams that the Wolves might match up better or worse against. I think they're a good competitive matchup with Oklahoma City this year. We've seen that with all 4 of those games being split 2-2, the last 2 being especially close. I think they still match up decently with Denver. I'd say a team like the Clippers that can play 5 out, put all the guys on the perimeter, stretch them out a little bit, and take away a little bit of the effectiveness of a guy like Rudy Gobert, who just really controls the middle. A team like that with Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, that could give them problems if that was a matchup at some point. But again, not saying they couldn't beat them, and they did in fact beat them earlier this year when the Clippers were more or less at full strength and getting hot. So I think it matters how you're playing in the moment. Some of it's stylistic, a lot of it is health, and that's what I would say is more important than, hey, how did the season series go in the course of the regular season? And finally, listener Clark weighs in from Detroit. Subject line, hey, bleep. Email says, Dan Campbell is the man in Detroit. We may not have won the Super Bowl, but we did way better than anybody else thought that we would. The 49ers were the better team in the second half, but I defend Campbell going for it because our kicker situation has been a bit dicey, and we did pretty good on 4th down conversions, and had Reynolds not dropped the ball, that game would have been different, but it is what it is. LOL, I just read your article and had to defend my team. God bless you and yours from cold, snowy Detroit, Michigan. There was not a single period in that email, but you know what? From the humble beginning of it, where he called me an expletive, to the whole nature of it, I kind of softened on Clark. Didn't hate it as much as I would. I was worried about where we were going after that introduction, but you know what? A lot of the points he made are just fine. I still think Campbell would have been better served kicking a field goal, at least in one of those situations, and that his game management at the end of the game left something to be desired. But yeah, at the end of the day, if they get 1 or 2 things to go their way, if they don't fumble, if they don't drop passes, if they don't have a potential interception bounce off a defensive back's helmet, we are probably talking about Detroit playing Kansas City in the Super Bowl and not San Francisco. So a lot of that was second guessing. Some of that was, hey, you should have made the right decision in the moment. So thank you for the emails. Thank you for the comments, everybody. Appreciate all of you very much. We'll be back at it again on Monday with Patrick Royce. Until then, enjoy your weekend. I'm Michael Rand. We'll see you then.